civil engineer at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services in the Dam Bureau. So I work on the dams, not so much on everything else DES does. So at the end, feel free to ask any questions, and I apologize ahead of time if I don't have an answer for you regarding other issues that DES deals with. But I know quite a bit about the dam, and that's why I'm here today to talk about, kind of how the dam came to be and where we see it going in the future. The presentation is roughly probably about an hour long. There's quite a bit of information in it, so I'll try to get through it. But certainly at the end, any questions, we can kind of go over anything that you guys see or don't understand. So this is a photo from 1918 of the dam and its kind of configuration that we see it today. This is so just out of the frame is the red barn. You're going to see that quite a bit. The barn in the White House just downstream, and obviously that's the inlet where the water goes from the pond into the outlet channel and through the dam. So let's get moving here. So the Dam Bureau, just so everyone's aware, is broken up into generally 3 sections. Mr. Jim Gallagher oversees all 3 sections. He's the chief engineer. That name may ring a bell for some of you. And the 3 sections are, we have the dam safety section, and those folks are responsible for the inspection of over 2,600 dams throughout the state, both privately and publicly owned. And they also do all the permitting for any major repairs on all of those. And so they see dams and work with folks throughout the entire state. Everything from obviously public dams like Goose Pond to municipal dams like Canyon Street and private dams like Baltic Mill downstream on Nassau River. Then we have the operation and maintenance section. Those folks are responsible for doing all routine operations at all the dams, general maintenance. They oversee 213 dams. That primarily is dams owned by DES, which is 100 plus, and then another similar number owned by Fish and Game. And so those folks do all the operations. They're the ones opening the gates, closing the gates, doing the drawdowns, doing the mowing. So they're the ones you generally see out at the dams, the white truck down at the dam, or the mowing, anything like that. Then there's the section that I am responsible for. So I oversee the engineering and construction section at the Dam Bureau. We are responsible for major repairs on over 270 dams. The reason that number is slightly different is I also oversee reconstruction on dams owned by state parks, DOT, UNH, other state entities. And so that basically entails formulating the budgets for those repairs, but also we have our own in-house engineers that I oversee, surveying crew, and construction crew. And you're going to see some of the photos prior to my time of the construction crew working on Goose Pond. And so we also oversee emergency action plans, which is a big item for Goose Pond because it is a high hazard dam. So we oversee those for several high hazard dams and significant hazard dams. I'll get into that as well. So this kind of shows a map of all the dams that I am responsible for and some of the breakdowns in the numbers. So we have roughly 50 high hazard dams that I'm responsible for, 38 significant, 94 lows. And what that means, high, significant, low, isn't so much the size of it. Actually, it has nothing to do with the size of the dam or the size of the water body. I apologize that it kicked over. But it has to do with generally the impacts downstream. So a high hazard dam such as Goose Pond, if the dam was to fail, probable loss of life. Significant hazard, potential loss of life. Low hazard, minimal damage. And so those dams have to meet different criteria. Goose Pond being a high hazard has to meet the utmost criteria. And so this is an overview of Goose Pond. That's why we're here today. I just kind of want to go over, as I go through the presentation, how I orient myself. Generally, whenever we're talking about parts of the dam, we're always looking downstream. So the lake is behind me. I am looking downstream. Therefore, the right side is that side, the west side, and the left side is the east side. So always looking downstream. Goose Pond is roughly 31 feet tall, 1,200 feet long. The drainage area is almost 16 square miles. There's a map in the back, I believe, of the full drainage area. And as you're probably all aware, it's roughly 620 acres of water line. So the dam generally is a earth embankment dam with a concrete core wall. And that first picture that showed up, that was the concrete wall that runs through the dam. On either side of that, there is now earth to help stabilize that wall, help to keep the water from moving through. And then we have the outlet structure. Goose Pond has one of the most intricate outlet structures in the state, and I'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But that's where the water goes through the dam, both during normal summer months, flood, and then also during the winter drawdown. So a little bit more on that. You can see in this photo, this is kind of a close-up of that outlet structure, and most people probably have seen it, but the way it works generally is at the lake level, there's a box, and the water pours into that box under normal conditions. The water then flows down a chute and cascades over this tunnel. That tunnel is there for gates to discharge. So in front of that box on the lake, you're going to see more photos of this, but there's 3 very large gates and 2 small low gates. Out of those 5 gates, we only use 1. And there's kind of a reason behind that. But anyways, we only use 1, and that's how we get the water down in the winter time. But if we were to open all those gates, all the water would flow through that tunnel downstream. So the high hazard dam, this is what we call the inundation map. What you see highlighted are the areas that would be impacted if there was a sudden release of Goose Pond through the dam. This map is very old. It was developed in 1994. However, it does show that there's roughly 60 homes that would be impacted, numerous town road crossings, obviously impacts to Route 4, and it stops at Mascoma Lake. That's where the deficiencies in the map kind of come in. We don't know if the breach wave would stop at Mascoma Lake or actually overtop and fail Mascoma Lake and continue down into Lebanon. Which is probably the case given the size of Goose Pond, especially during a flooding event. So we're a part of this big project, and I'll kind of jump on this later, is that we're going to try to redo all this mapping, and we're making progress on that. But that is why Goose Pond is obviously a high hazard dam. So how did Goose Pond get its name? According to records in the town of Canaan in 1769, Lord Terry's expedition came to the lake. I'm not really sure why, probably some mapping or something, but came across a bunch of geese, decided to kill one, hence named it Goose Pond. I don't know if that's true or accurate. That is what has been dug up in the town of Canaan records. And so shortly thereafter, 1790, a sawmill was built at the outlet of the pond, probably a very small dam. And this dam that you see in this photo was also a very small dam. Not the same dam that was in 1790. This dam was, I believe this photo was taken just before 1918, probably 1917, 1916, somewhere around there. But it's a much smaller dam than what is there present. Obviously this one was only 9 feet high, 59-foot long spillway, and it was completely constructed of wood, probably a timber crib, which is basically a wood shell filled with rocks. And so those dams generally only last a couple of decades, if that. So 1790, there was probably numerous dams at the site. But this is the last one before the big reconstruction that took place. So in 1917, plans were prepared by the Mascoma River Improvement Company, presumably for water storage for downstream mill use, both in Enfield and Lebanon. Basically, they were using the water that's in Goose Pond to power those mills. So they would fill up in the winter, and during the summer, they would draw it all down, just keeping the river flowing downstream for power usage. So these are some of the plans from them. I know they're not really legible in this, but it's just, we have some of the records from back then when they developed those plans. And so, 1918, they started started construction, and this is also plays upon that photo I showed at the beginning. But this is the outlet structure, similar to what we see today. Behind that group of men there, we have the concrete wall going in. The earth hasn't been fully built up on either side of it, but the dam is roughly 24 feet high, the 59-foot complex spillway, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And it's the same length as what we see today. So that wall is still there today. That outlet structure is still there. It's been modified, but similar. That little red box that you guys see with the gentleman standing on it, that is the old wooden dam. So to kind of give you a sense of scale, how much bigger the new dam really was and how much they increased the footprint of the site. One thing to note, you can't see it in this photo, but the original photo at the beginning of the presentation had a little gap in the wall, and I apologize if I didn't point this out. That gap is where the original Goose Pond Road ran. So the original Goose Pond Road ran past the farmhouse and the red barn that's downstream of the dam. Their driveway was the road. The road went out into the impoundment and moved up. So part of the project was they moved Goose Pond Road further east to allow for the footprint of what we see in Goose Pond today.
So how high is that concrete wall?
That concrete wall is roughly 25 feet. I think it does extend a little bit into the ground, but not that far. What they did at that time, below the outlet structure, they actually drove spruce sheeting to try to cut off water from going below. Mixed results on that, but they tried to do what they could to kind of cut it off. This is just another photo of the old dam to kind of give you a sense of where the water was at that dam, and then obviously the new dam behind it.
How much acreage was increased with the new dam?
I don't know off the top of my head, but there's another photo further on. I would imagine that the old footprint of the pond was likely even lower than what our winter drawdown level is by quite a bit. So it's a much smaller pond, obviously. This is another photo from 1918 showing some of the work going on. One thing that does come up quite a bit in this presentation are these right here there's one on each side. These are the low-level gates that empty the pond. And right now we use the one on this side. That's the only gate that we use to lower the water level in the pond every fall and close it up, or if we have to regulate the pond for whatever reason, that's the gate that we use. So there's one on each side. They were put in 1918. And then in 1928, there was what we call seepage, or water moving through the dam. Basically, people were noticing wet spots along the downstream side of that embankment, various locations. Throughout the decades, there's always been water issues in the basement of the downstream house and barn at varying water levels. So this drain was put in to try to mitigate some of those issues. Basically a foundation drain. So they installed a clay pipe to try to capture some of that water moving through and bring it down to the outlet. That pipe is still in place today. And then in 1952, more modifications were made primarily to the outlet structure, that kind of complex spillway. Were made by the Grand State Electric Company, and they were trying to increase the discharge capacity of the dam, trying to get as much flood water as possible out of the dam. And so they also at the same time slightly widened the embankment. I think they did all the riprap that you see today on the upstream side of the dam. All that rock work was put in 1950. The outlet structure was so complex that they actually did a physical model in 1948 of trying to figure out what would be the most efficient way to get water through it. And as far as I know, this is one of a very small handful of physical models that were ever done on any dams in New Hampshire. And so there's all kinds of scenarios that they came up with. And basically, what we see today is the final outcome. And what they did was, they did a couple of things. First, they cut a much bigger hole in the front and installed several large gates so that water could then be sluiced through that tunnel more efficiently. The other thing they did is they installed the flashboards up at the top. Some of you folks might be familiar with that, but it's basically wood that is on the top, and if the water level gets to a certain elevation, those pins that you see in that photo break or bend, and it allows for much more water to go through the chute. So they kind of reconfigured everything. Obviously, those two low-level gates are still there, and yeah, most of the work was done regarding the outlet. Another photo of that work being done in 1952. You can see a better, clearer picture of those flashboard pins. Work showing the upstream embankment work that they did at that time. Obviously, you can see the red barn, the house I keep referring to, and will continue to do so. Another thing that they did was they tried to build this, I believe it was kind of a debris catch or trash rack system in front of everything. So if trees or debris came down, you get caught by that and not damage the flashboards. You can, now they have the wood on the flashboard, so it's much easier to see. Those are 2 feet higher than what we currently have out there today. At that point in time, the pond was run 2 feet higher than its current configuration. And so that's why those are 5 feet tall. Now we have 3 foot tall ones. But one thing to note, that following winter, the ice came in and destroyed their whole trash rack system. So now that's why we don't see it today. So I don't even know if there's remnants of that. I don't think there is at all down below the water or anything like that. So in 1969, the state of New Hampshire acquired the dam from Grand State Electric Company. No longer was it needed for all the downstream power usage or anything like that. It was primarily used for recreation. And so the state of New Hampshire took it over recreation and flood control. And so one thing that did occur in the 1980s, more drains were installed on the other side, so on the right side, the opposite side from the red house. Those drains were installed, same reason, water, wet areas were observed, so those drain lines were installed to try to mitigate some of that from happening. And then some of you guys might be familiar with the work that took place in 1990. That was performed by our in-house construction crew, and that work was basically just a rehabilitation of all the concrete that was out there. At that point in time, the concrete was, some of it was 40 years old, some of it was much older than that, original concrete, so it was basically a big rehab job to try to fix all the concrete that was out there. One of the things that we also did, and this kind of illustrates things a little bit better, is we drew the pond all the way down and did rehabilitation work on the concrete there, but we also installed 3 new gates, and those are basically the stacks of wood that you see there. They're very tall, large wooden gates. And I don't think those gates have ever been opened or touched since they were installed in 1990, nor would I want to touch them. And so that's one of the things that, is coming up that we need to address, is to fix those, because, we're now talking about wood that is 32 years old so the other thing at that time, you can see the 2 low-level outlets. Word on the street was they discovered something, and nobody knows what it was, about this gate at that time, and the word was, don't ever touch it. So we don't touch that gate. The dam operators aren't sure why. It was just, don't bother with it. I don't know if it's a function of you can't get it closed again or something of that nature. But that's why we use the one on the other side. So this is another photo of some of the concrete deterioration that was taking place. This is Bill Haskell. He was one of the reigning longtime dam bureau employees that retired 2 years ago. So more photos of the work being done to rehabilitate the concrete in the tunnel. And then in 2012, we started some more deterioration inside that tunnel, and so we went in there and did basically some just patchwork throughout that tunnel to try to seal up some things. However, 2013, that's when things started to get a little more interesting. During that time of work, we discovered a couple other leaks. This one right here, obviously, this is the flashboards right there. So we have a leak just downstream of the flashboards. Well, you know, we always see leaks at all of our dams, everything. The reason this one was concerning is that wall between the flashboards and where the leak is, that's the concrete cutoff wall that runs to the dam that's supposed to stop all the water from getting through. Obviously some water does, but that's a lot of water from getting through a concrete cutoff wall. We know that visually you can see that concrete as you walk out on the dam. It's leaning in some spots, it's cracked in a lot of spots. There's evidence in the record that some of the concrete may have frozen in January of 1918 when they installed that, which led to a lot of cracks that occurred. So the integrity of that concrete wall really became into question. You know, what are we seeing? So at that time, we went out there, our own in-house engineers drilled several wells to try to figure out what does the water look like as it moves through the dam. And we encountered all kinds of soft soils when we drilled those. When I say drilling, basically it's a 4-inch diameter drill hole that goes all the way down, presumably to bedrock or wherever you want to go. And inside of that is a small PVC 2-inch pipe that is used to measure the water level. So this is a view of those wells that we installed in 2013. You can see on the bottom chart, if that's a year period, showing the lake level dropping during the winter and coming back up. So as you can see, all of the wells are generally connected to the lake level, which is to be expected. You would think that the water level inside the dam would go up and down as the lake goes up and down. So that wasn't necessarily that concerning. The concerning thing is those two wells, 5 and 6, over there, those two wells were showing artesian pressure and still do today. So I believe it's well 6, the further downstream one. That well will have water a foot, at least a foot, if not more, above the ground surface at any given time during the summer. So what that means is even though the ground is dry and you can walk on it and it doesn't seem wet, the water is actually down below. There's enough pressure pushing water up into that well that it's a foot above. So that was and is still very concerning because now we know water is moving at a pretty good clip below the dam. So in 2018, we finally were able to secure the funding to get an outside consultant involved. Knowing what we were seeing out there, we knew that this scope of this project was going to be above our capabilities to do in-house. This was going to require quite a bit of not only investigation, but pretty extensive design work too. So the first thing we have to do is kind of sit down collaboratively with all different people at the Dam Bureau and the consultant to figure out what is the most likely scenario that the dam could fail. And generally what we came up with was it would be an event where water moving either around the outlet structure or below that concrete wall leads to erosion inside the dam and a failure under either not only flood conditions, but also normal conditions. So the concerning thing being that, you know, any given day, if we weren't monitoring it or not paying attention, something could drastically go wrong. We do monitor it enough that I don't feel that that would occur, but it's certainly concerning. So part of this project overall is to lower that risk of that ever happening. So shortly thereafter, our consultant, Dan Fleming, went out and drilled a whole bunch of wells in the fall of 2018. They did 11 additional borings. Most of those borings have 2 wells in them, so there's one well that's very deep, one well that's shallow to try to figure out where that water is as it's moving under the dam. And so that's where those little orange boxes come from. So you guys have probably seen those and wondering what's going on. So each one of those orange boxes is Most likely 2 wells, but some with 1. But the reason the box is there, and you'll see a photo further on, it's full of instrumentation for us to monitor the water in there and what's going on. They also inspected all those tow drains on either side. So if you ever walk the embankment behind the red barn, you might see small, or not small, but they're basically 4 feet by 2 feet concrete, like lids. And those lids that you see on the ground surface are basically inspection ports into that drain system that was installed. And so we popped those, got a camera in there, and weren't surprised at all that although they are flowing, there's debris in there, there's roots, there's cracked pipes, broken pipes. So it's kind of working, but certainly not as efficient as they could. We also did the same on the other side. So we weren't surprised to see more artesian pressure in the wells that we installed. I will go ahead and hopefully this works. So this is one of the ones downstream. If we're looking downstream, it's on the right-hand side below the dam. Similar to those other 2 wells that we saw artesian pressure. And hopefully this works. This kind of gives you a sense. You see the water dripping from the box. That water is coming up out of one of the wells. And so that's the rate of flow. We actually had to, in order to get it so that we could monitor the water level in there, we actually had to stick another extension of PVC up another 6 feet in order for the water to stop dribbling out. And so that's why there's that one well when you walk out there that has a piece of PVC sticking way up in the air. This is some of the instrumentation that's in there. You can see in that photo, those are actually 1-inch wells, but those 2 little PVC pipes are the 2 wells that are in there. The drilling encountered rock between 8 and 54 feet below the dam. 8 feet's manageable, pretty shallow. 54 feet, that's an additional, basically take the dam height, you double that, and that's what you get below the dam. That's the depth of rock. So it's pretty far down below the outlet structure. Oh. So, moving on, so now we know we do have a situation on our hands where water is moving at a pretty good clip below the dam. How do we go ahead and try to fix that problem? So, that same consultant has been working on design plans and specifications to try to come up with a remedy on how we are going to manage this issue. And so these are the 50% design plans. They're also working on several different stability calculations to make sure the dam is stable, all that sort of stuff, and during earthquake and everything else. God forbid we ever had anything like that, but they are looking into it. So their conceptual solution, and I know some of this gets a little technical, so I'll try to walk through it the best I can, is where those current drains are on either side, we would come in, remove those drains, and go much deeper than we can, than what's out there now. We do that using 2 different methods. One method is we actually install a line of relief wells. So every 50 feet or so along the toe of the dam, we install anywhere between an 8-inch and a 12-inch well that goes all the way down to bedrock. And the idea is basically trying to get the water to flow into those wells to lower that water pressure. And so you can see in this is looking on the right side. On this plan view, all those little stick-ups, those are the wells. This zone right here is another drain that's going to be installed to capture all that water coming out of the wells and also to capture any additional water moving through the dam or below the dam. So this is just on the other side, similar concept. The other thing to mention, as part of installing all this drainage infrastructure and to make the dam more stable, we're actually going to widen the dam a little bit and flatten the slope. So the downstream slope won't be as steep as it is today. It will be more gradual. The issue with that, particularly on this side, is we run into our property line around the house and the barn. So in order to get around that, we will have to probably build a small retaining wall by the barn right on our property line to help basically keep that slope consistent but not infringe upon others' property or the barn. So this is kind of a cross through of what I was discussing. As you can see here, the dashed line is basically in this particular location, the existing ground surface. And you can see we're going to be building up the ground surface. Not much, but just a little bit to try to flatten that slope. But below that, we're going to be installing the relief wells, the drainage system, that box with the circles in it, that's the drain, if you will. And the whole downstream side of that slope will also have drain material. So any water that gets through that dam is going to be captured and monitored using this series of relief wells and drainage. So as part of that scope of work, we're going to be removing the old drain lines. The bottom of the new drain lines are probably going to be upwards of 15 feet below the current ground surface. So the relief wells are going to be going down all the way down to rock. So those will be going down 50 plus feet. However, that drain line infrastructure at a minimum is going to be around 15 feet below the ground surface. And there's going to be several different clean outs, so we can clean them, we can monitor them, we can do all kinds of different things. So we're going to be doing that on both sides, just for kind of a sense of scale. Those drain lines will receive the artesian pressure. In fact, that's the well right there that we first installed that had the water sticking up about a foot above it. Those drain lines are down 5 feet or so, so we're going to be going down another 10 feet below that at a minimum. So what else are we going to be doing as part of this project? Obviously, I discussed these big old wooden gates are somewhat scary. So we actually discovered that we don't even need them. Part of the regulations is we have to pass the design storm event at Goose Pond without any operations. And what that means is basically the dam cannot overtop during the design storm, which is we take the 100-year storm event and multiply it 2.5 times, and that's the inflow that we have coming in to the pond. The pond has to be able to handle that. We believe it does without even having to use these gates. So there's really no reason to have these anymore. And the same with the flashboards, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So we have to remove those gates. We're going to be putting in a concrete wall in their place with a small gate in the middle of that. That small gate will be set roughly at the winter drawdown level so that we can open it, do our winter drawdown, and kind of walk away. We don't have to worry about messing around with a low-level gate nearly as much as we always had to. The other thing is we want to rehab those 2 low-level gates. We want to get them both operating, not just one. And so hopefully we get in there and they seem to both work fine. That was the case up in Grafton Pond, actually. We were told similar, don't use one of the gates. And we drew it down a couple years ago and discovered they're both fine. So I don't know where that rumor came from, but hopefully it's the same here. Additionally, so this is kind of a cross-section looking at it. We have the new concrete wall, and then these are the flashboards up here. Those flashboards, this is a photo of them. Those are problematic. I know it's come up.
Those were the ones that leaked the last couple of years.
Yeah, and so they leak, the pins rot out, they fail, all kinds of things. We're going to be removing those and just replacing with concrete. So that maintenance headache kind of goes away. Once again, we just determined that we don't need them because of the configuration of the outlet structure. It can pass the storm event just fine. We're also going to be relining the tunnel. Over the years, as you saw in 2012 and other times, we did rehab to that tunnel. We don't need to pass all the water since we're getting rid of those big gates, so we're actually going to be lining the whole thing and just kind of sealing everything up that we can.
Are the summer levels and the winter levels going to remain the same?
I'll get into that in a little bit. But things are going to be a little different for the time period that we're working on this. Yeah, so this is a recent photo of the tunnel showing work being done, or work to be done. So how much is all this going to cost? I kind of threw up some, these are all just kind of estimates except for the first couple of bullets. Those have already taken place. But, you know, it's roughly $52,000 for that initial analysis to figure out what's wrong with it. $249,000 for all that drilling that took place out there.
An additional $62,000 for all the mapping that's taking place downstream to really figure out just what the inundation is going to be. That also includes the Mascoma Lake Dam, which is owned by us, because if you're going to look at one, you might as well look at all of them that you can. And so we're estimated around $375,000 for the total design. That includes specifications, so that when we get the funding to go to construction, we have a complete design set and bid package that we can put it out to bid for a contractor. We did have a cost estimate developed a year ago. Obviously, that doesn't take into account all the price fluctuations we've been seeing in the construction field in the past 6 months, because it's been crazy. But anyways, the estimate at that point in time was $3.4 million. We're hoping to go to the legislature for the 24-25 biennium to get the funding to do the work. Just so you know, we just started the 22-23 biennium, and so that's 2 years out from now. So basically, if all goes to plan, we'll get the funding in the summer of 2023, select the contractor that following fall. They start the spring of 2024, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, very optimistic, that it would take a year to get everything in so that they can be done the following spring. Obviously, this is all very dependent on a lot of different factors. If we get the funding, who knows what the prices are going to do in the next couple of years. Whether, the contractor can be selected and get ready to go, and then we have some crazy spring flooding event that kind of shuts everything down. I mean, it's been, with everything happening, the hardest time to do construction for me these past couple of years has been December of all times, because it seems like we get 2 feet of snow, and then we get 2 inches of rain, followed by another 2 inches of rain. And so December's been a tough one. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but weather can play into a factor immensely. These relief wells are pretty specialized, actually very specialized. There's, as far as I'm aware, no other dam in New Hampshire that has them. And so it's going to be a pretty specialized contractor that is selected to do this type of work. And so how that contractor goes about doing the work is also going to play into the timeline. And then obviously any design issues that either come up between now and then. Like I said, they're still running all kinds of models, seepage and everything else. They may change things. I mean, the relief wells, I think, came into play even after the first time we spoke. Yeah, so things are still very much in flux, but I'm just throwing these numbers out there so that people are kind of made aware of what may happen. So just to kind of recap, and I'll get into this a little bit more, we will have to lower the pond to its deepest level. So those low level gates, we are going to have to go down that winter after we get the contractor selected. Now obviously if the contractor or the contracts don't work out, we're not going to be drawing it down, but it's contingent upon them starting. We draw the pond all the way down. That spring the contractor comes in, builds their staging area. They're also going to have to build a bridge to access both sides of the dam. And then they get going heavily that summer. So that following summer, the pond will be most likely all the way down. And I'll get into reasons why that is really important. But the pond will be all the way down so that they can do some of that outlet repair work, repair those gates, build that concrete wall, and also start installing all the wells along both sides of the dam. That following fall, they finish all that concrete work, they regrade the embankments, tie all that well and drainage all together, and then hopefully wrap that up that winter so that the spring of 2025 we can then start refilling the pond. The contractor can deload, and then it's just a matter of waiting for the pond to come back to normal. So that basically, as you probably saw, is going to likely require at least 1 year of significant impacts where the pond is all the way down. That may trickle into 2 years because, as a lot of you are aware, Goose Pond is a very hard refill because it is so high up in the watershed. A perfect example of this is Grafton Pond has taken a long time in the past summer to refill after we did some concrete work up there. It also came down for other reasons, but it can be difficult. Hopefully we have normal precipitation and things can get back to normal, but I would expect at least a year of significant impacts, possibly 2 years of significant impacts to try to get this work done. You can see on this map, this is basically based off all of the bathymetry maps that are out there. The orange line is the deepest possible line. That's probably what the pond looked like back when George Harris was getting his goose. It probably looked something like that, but over the years it has come up quite a bit to where it is today. So the pond could possibly be down that low. Once again, I am not positive on this because it comes into play on contractor means and methods. But the reason that it's important to try to get it down as low as we can to that level is you see the blue line right here? That's that level in the vicinity of the dam. And so not only do we need it down that low to rehab those gates, but we also need it down that low to install all the drainage infrastructure downstream. We're actually going to be installing basically all those drains, everything's going to tie into a big system at the downstream end of that outlet structure. In order to get all of that in, we need as much lowering as we can to bring that water level down so that the contractor can do it safely. He's not fighting water the entire time. And that's not only going to make things much safer, but it's going to help him or her with the timeline of how this takes place. Obviously, if the water's much higher, it's a much more costly project trying to deal with that water, and the timeline gets extended. So in other words, maybe in theory we could keep it at, say, the winter level or something like that, but instead of 2 years of impact, we might be looking at like 3 years, because the construction period just gets extended because the contractor's fighting water the entire time. And a little bit more just on this. This is a different cross-section, but similar one, showing where that water level is and trying to get that infrastructure in, not only the relief wells, but also all of the drain pipes and everything else that, upwards of 15 feet below the ground surface. So trying to get everything in. So ultimately the goals of the project is to fix Goose Pond Dam so that for the next 50, 60 years, you guys won't see us except we're out there mowing. That's the goal of the project, is to lower the risk posed by the seepage and other issues we're seeing out there. Lower that risk so there's not we're not worried about potential failure and inundation to downstream communities. We lower that risk. We also lower the risk of one of those wooden gates blowing out unexpectedly, happening in August when everybody's boats are in or anything like that. I don't think it would inundate anybody downstream, but you would certainly lose Goose Pond. And then we'd have to come in and fix those. And then also trying to develop new and more accurate maps so that if anything did happen at Goose Pond, we could accurately know who's going to be impacted, when, where, and so on and so forth downstream. It also helps with basically managing the water throughout the entire watershed from Lebanon all the way up to Goose Pond.